My parents left me off their will, leaving their jewelry and savings to my aunt, telling me she's always been more like a daughter. But when that daughter blocked their number, they ran to me, and I said, "You chose your family, remember?" My dad showed up at my porch last summer, standing there with a paper bag of apples like that was supposed to mean something. "She's not answering our calls anymore," he said, his voice quieter than I ever remembered. "She blocked us. Just disappeared." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, staring at the man who once told me that his sister, was more like a daughter than I ever was. "You chose your family," I said. "Remember?" He didn't respond. Just looked like he'd been carrying 50 years of mistakes on his shoulders. And now they wanted me back. "I'm Maris. I'm 42 and single. I live in a quiet house in upstate New York near Canandaigua Lake. I never moved far from where I grew up, and truthfully, I never had much reason to. My life was fine. Nothing glamorous. I work in adult education, teaching basic art and wellness classes to older adults, many of whom come just to talk. It's fulfilling in ways I never expected. I didn't expect to have to start emotionally parenting my own parents in my 40s, though. Growing up, I always knew I was second place in their eyes. It wasn't something they said out loud, but something I felt deeply, like wallpaper I was forced to live with. The centerpiece of our family orbit was always my Aunt Rosalind, my dad's little sister. She was only 10 years younger than him, so not much older than me, and had no kids of her own. She was glamorous, dramatic, always impeccably dressed, with a laugh that filled a room and made people feel like they were in on some secret. My parents adored her. Worshipped her, really. Every family gathering, she was front and center. She brought gifts and stories, flattered my mom's cooking, then gently corrected her on how she could upgrade the flavor next time. My dad hung on her every word. She was always brilliant, put together, just like family should be. I was the actual daughter. And there was background noise. Still, I tried. I helped. I called, even when they forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. I brought casseroles when they were sick. I cleaned the gutters when my dad's knees gave out. I listened to the same old stories, the same backhanded compliments, the same passive-aggressive digs about how Rosalind would have done it better. I swallowed it. Every time. Then came the bombshell. In 2022, my mom had a minor stroke. I dropped everything, stayed with them for 2 weeks, and ran their entire lives, scheduled follow-ups, cleaned the house, even handled their bills. Rosalind visited once. Once. She stayed 30 minutes, said she had a spa treatment in Syracuse, and left. They never questioned it. They just lit up when she walked through the door and deflated a little when I was the one making dinner. It was around then I got a call from their lawyer, Mr. Alpern. He'd known me since I was a teenager, but this time he wasn't calling to say hi. "Maris," he said, "I thought you should know. Your parents updated their will." I knew instantly. I just knew. Rosalind got everything. Their house. Their jewelry collection, pieces passed down from my grandmother that I always assumed would go to me. Their savings. A hefty account that had quietly grown over the years, totaling over $120,000. I got $2,000 in a general use trust. Their way of saying, "Here, get yourself something nice." I confronted them. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do that?" My mother, lying on the couch with a blanket across her lap, didn't even hesitate. "She's always been more like a daughter." My father nodded. "She understands us. She doesn't make us feel judged." It wasn't just the words. It was how quickly they said them. How easy. That night, I packed my things and left. I didn't call. I didn't text. I needed space, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I deserved to take some. For nearly a year, I kept minimal contact. I didn't go over the holidays. I sent cards on birthdays but didn't follow up with calls. I started drawing stronger boundaries. My therapist said it was overdue. I was starting to feel less guilty for not being what they wanted. Then, the twist. Rosalind disappeared. She married a man named Peter, a retired real estate guy from Arizona. She sold her home in Syracuse, cut off contact with half the family, including my parents, and moved to Scottsdale. She blocked them on everything. Poof. Gone. Suddenly, I was the daughter again. The one they wanted. Needed. My mother started leaving voicemails. Long, rambling ones about how time was slipping and how people make mistakes. My dad wrote me a letter, apologizing if we made you feel overlooked. If. Not because we did. Just if. Then came that day on the porch. My dad with his bag of apples. I let him talk for maybe 2 minutes. He told me Rosalind had been ignoring their calls for months. That she cut them off entirely. That they were heartbroken. They wanted to reconnect. They needed help. They wanted a family. That's when I told him, you chose your family. Remember? I shut the door and left him standing there. I didn't feel triumphant after I closed the door on my father that day. That would have been easier, maybe even satisfying. But all I felt was a strange kind of hollowness, like I'd said something I had rehearsed in my head for years, and now that it was out in the open, there was no echo. Just quiet. They stopped trying for a few weeks. Maybe they were embarrassed. Or maybe they were hoping I'd change my mind. Either way, the silence was a relief. I used that time to settle more into my new life in Ithaca. I'd taken a job teaching art therapy at a community wellness center, less pay, yes, but more peace. The Finger Lakes region had always felt like a reset button to me. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom rental near Buttermilk Falls. The kind of place where the mornings are silent except for birds and the distant hum of someone mowing a lawn. At the center, I worked mostly with older adults, people recovering from grief, trauma, chronic illness. It was strangely healing, guiding them through painting or simple clay work, and hearing their stories. A few had estranged families, and sometimes we'd exchange knowing looks, subtle nods. I never shared my own situation, not directly, but I think they sensed it. The loneliness still came in waves, though. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the idea of family, what it could have been. I'd look at other women my age, some juggling their kids and parents, Sunday dinners, and school pickups, and I'd wonder if I missed out, or escaped. Then the emails started. My mother began writing to me. At first they were short, clumsy. A few lines about how the weather had been unpredictable lately or how she was missing having someone to talk to. It felt like someone struggling to make conversation with a stranger. Which, in many ways, we were. Then the tone shifted. She started reminiscing. Sending me paragraphs about my childhood, about things I'd forgotten, or maybe things I'd tried to forget. The time I had pneumonia at 10 and she stayed up for 2 nights making soup and changing cold compresses. The red sweater I wore in my senior photo that she still thinks of every time she sees that color. Things like that. At first, I didn't reply. I wasn't sure what to say. But after the 3rd or 4th message, I found myself writing back, just a sentence or two. Nothing emotional. Just responses like, yeah, I remember that. Or if the sweater was from Aunt Lena. She never acknowledged what they did. Not directly. The emails were like walking on ice, careful, polite, circling the cracks. My dad, on the other hand, took a different route. He called once a week like clockwork, leaving voicemails I never picked up. Long ones. Rambling ones. Sometimes he just sat in silence for 10 seconds before saying, all right, love you. Then click. Once, he left a message saying, I still don't know how we got so off track. I wish we could go back. It felt almost surreal to hear that from the same man who used to say things like, you're being too sensitive, whenever I spoke up about how they treated me. I forwarded the voicemail to my therapist. She asked me, do you want them to understand, or do you want them to apologize? I didn't know. Maybe both. Maybe neither. And then, because family drama never takes a holiday, I got a phone call from Rosalind. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered it without thinking. Her voice hadn't changed at all. Still silk dipped in honey, still theatrical. Maris, she said, how are you, darling? I almost laughed. She told me she'd heard that my parents had been trying to get in touch with me. She wanted to clear the air, as she put it. Said she hadn't abandoned them, she just needed boundaries. That she had given enough over the years and didn't want to spend the rest of her life cleaning up other people's feelings. I'm not the villain here, she added. I never said you were, I replied. There was a pause. Well, your parents think I am. They keep calling. I blocked them for my sanity. They gave you everything, I said, keeping my voice calm. They rewrote their will and said you were more like a daughter to them. I didn't ask them to, she snapped. No, I said. But you didn't say no, either. She hung up shortly after that. I think that was the last thread connecting us. Whatever kind of mythic bond my parents had conjured up between Rosalind and themselves, whatever story they'd built that cast her as the golden child and me as the spare, it broke that day. Cleanly. Finally, in December, I got a Christmas card from my parents. No note. Just their names signed at the bottom in my mother's perfect cursive. Inside was a $25 gift card to Bed Bath & Beyond. The kind of thing you might give a coworker you don't really know well. I didn't send anything back. I went snowshoeing with friends instead. Made mulled wine. Watched the snow fall without thinking about who was disappointed in me or who I was failing to impress. But even then, at the quietest, most peaceful times, their shadows still trailed behind me. The guilt, the longing, the frustration, they don't go away just because the emails stop or the voicemails get deleted. They just change shape. February brought another shift. It had been a relatively mild winter, but there was still that edge in the wind, the kind that cut through your sleeves and reminded you spring was still a rumor. I was in the middle of preparing a lesson on color blending for my Friday art group when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. They left a voicemail. I waited until after class to check it. It was a nurse from Geneva General Hospital. My mother had been admitted with a severe case of pneumonia. She'd been unresponsive when my father called the ambulance, and though she was stabilized now, they wanted to notify next of kin. Not Rosalind. Me. I drove the hour to the hospital on instinct more than desire. It wasn't a choice I felt proud of. Just something that felt embedded in me, like a muscle reflex you don't question. The room was quiet except for the beeping monitors. My mother looked smaller somehow, her face drawn and her skin pale, her hair, usually so carefully set, flattened and dull. My father sat beside her bed, holding one of her hands with both of his, as if trying to keep her anchored. When he saw me in the doorway, his eyes welled up. "Thank you for coming," he whispered, his voice raspy and almost hoarse. I said nothing, just walked in and sat in the corner chair. I didn't touch her. I didn't ask what happened. I watched the machines blink and beep and tried to feel something beyond the muted haze of duty. He started talking, slowly. About how fast it came on. How she'd been complaining about being tired and a little off for a week but refused to see a doctor. How he found her collapsed in the hallway that morning. I nodded but said nothing. That was the rhythm of the next few days. I came. I sat. I left. No grand reunion. No tearful apology. Just quiet coexistence in a sterile room with the ghosts of all the words we never said lining the walls like wallpaper. Rosalind never called. Not once. I checked with the nurses, no one named Rosalind had tried to visit or inquire about her condition. My dad never brought her up. On day 3, he broke the silence between us while we sat outside the room drinking bad coffee from vending machines. "I know we got it wrong, Maris," he said suddenly. I looked over at him, unsure of what to say. We thought she'd be there for us. We thought you were too independent, too distant. And now she's gone, and you're here." I wasn't going to let him off easy. "You didn't think I was distant. You made me distant." He winced, like the words hit harder than he expected. I continued, slowly. "You spent years making me feel like an afterthought. Every holiday, every family dinner, you didn't even hide it. You just paraded her around like she was everything you ever wanted in a daughter, and I was just, in the way." He stared at his coffee. His hand shook slightly. "We thought we were being fair. She didn't have anyone. She never had a family. She had you," I snapped. "She had both of you more than I ever did." It wasn't an outburst. It was a truth I'd been holding for decades, finally set down like a weight off my chest. He didn't deny it. He just nodded, slowly. That silence again, more honest than any apology. My mother woke up later that day. Her first words when she saw me were a whisper, dry and brittle, "You're here." I nodded. "I'm here." She cried. Quietly, like she didn't want to be seen doing it. "I thought you hated us," she said. "I don't," I replied. "But I'm still angry." She didn't answer, but she held my hand longer than I expected. Over the next week, I found myself caring for them, not because they deserved it, but because I could. And there's a difference. I helped settle their insurance paperwork, stocked the fridge with groceries, and scheduled their follow-ups. I didn't move back in. I didn't offer hugs or forgiveness. But I showed up. Not for them, really, for me. To prove that I could be better than what they taught me love was supposed to look like. They started walking on eggshells around me after that. My father asked permission before calling. My mother constantly checked if she was asking too much. It was uncomfortable, but not unfamiliar, just a reversal of the power dynamic we'd always lived in. One evening while I was driving home from their house, I saw a message notification pop up on my phone screen, an email from Rosalind. Just the subject line made my stomach drop. "They're still yours, you know." I pulled over to a rest stop, heart thumping, and opened the message. "Maris, I know things didn't play out the way any of us expected. Your parents were difficult, but they were still good people in their way. I couldn't carry them anymore. I hope you can. I don't regret stepping away. I only regret not doing it sooner. They're still your parents, after all." I stared at that last line for a long time. They're still your parents. The thing is, they are. But I'm no longer their daughter in the way they imagined. I'm not the girl who waited for scraps of attention at holidays, who took backhanded compliments as love, who believed she'd done something wrong just by being herself. I'm someone else now. Someone who doesn't need their approval to feel whole. I sat on that rest stop bench for a long time, letting Rosalind's message settle like sediment in a still lake. The sheer arrogance of it, of her washing her hands clean while implying that I should carry the load she'd dumped. Not because it was right. But because it was mine. There was no apology. No regret. Just a cool dismissal cloaked in faux concern. I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking, not emotionally, not from the part of me that still wanted to fix things, but practically. I realized something I hadn't before: I had all the power now. The choices, the narrative, the future, they were in my hands. The people who once shaped every corner of my life with judgment and favoritism now sat waiting, dependent, unsure. And I was no longer in the background. After my mother recovered and settled back at home, things were awkward for a while. I visited maybe once a week, brought groceries, or helped manage appointments. I kept things cordial but distant. I made it clear with my actions that I was not sliding back into the obedient daughter role. Then came the lawyer's letter. Apparently, my parents had contacted Mr. Alpern again. They wanted to update their will. This time, they were leaving everything to me. The house. The accounts. The heirlooms. Even the same jewelry they once said Rosalind deserved. They didn't tell me directly. It came in the form of a formal letter and a few attached documents asking for my acknowledgement. I read it once, set it down, and smiled. But not the kind of smile you wear when you're happy. It was the kind of smile that tastes like justice, not revenge in the dark, twisted sense, but a balancing of the scales. A quiet reckoning. I didn't sign anything right away. Instead, I arranged a meeting with Mr. Alpern. "I want to put some conditions in place," I told him. He looked at me over his glasses, curious. "Such as?" I leaned forward. "I'll accept their inheritance. I'll take over everything. But I want it legally noted that they cannot contest it later, and that Rosalind is explicitly excluded. Not just omitted, excluded. And I want to establish a trust, one that gives them just enough for basic living expenses, managed by a third-party custodian. The rest stays under my control." He nodded slowly. "You're sure?" I was. Because this wasn't about getting back at them. It was about boundaries. About ending the cycle. They had made their choices. They handed everything to someone else, thinking I'd be the fallback plan. They learned the hard way that people don't stay when they're treated like furniture. But I wasn't going to let them starve. That wasn't who I was. What I was going to do was make sure that they understood they were no longer in charge. They no longer dictated the terms. And that trust? It was generous, but firm. No vacations, no luxury. Just enough to cover bills, health care, and groceries. I even gave them a monthly stipend, $800, adjusted annually for inflation. Fair. Dignified. but symbolic. A reminder. They accepted. Of course they did. They had no other option. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't have to. The silence that followed every conversation said enough. The months that followed were strangely peaceful. My parents stopped trying to be emotionally close. I think they understood, finally, that the bridge had burned. But we coexisted. Like neighbors forced into the same building. Rosalind emailed again. Once. I heard you took control. Guess you finally got what you wanted. Don't let it consume you. Or I replied with 2 words. You did. She never responded. I used part of the inheritance to put a down payment on a lakefront cabin near Skaneateles. Quiet, tucked into the trees. I spend my evenings painting, growing herbs, and walking the trails. Sometimes I host small gatherings, friends from work, students from my program, people who make me laugh and never ask for more than I'm willing to give. I kept the heirloom jewelry in a glass case, every brooch and bracelet they once said wasn't mine to have. Not because I care about the diamonds. But because they're proof. Proof that you can take everything from someone and still lose them completely. My parents still live in their house. I visit quarterly. I review their finances, ensure their medical coverage is active, and make sure the bills are paid. And then I leave. No dinner. No hugs. No pretend affection. They chose Rosalind. And when she vanished, they learned a painful truth: love isn't a safety net you can rip and stitch back together when it suits you. Sometimes, it disappears quietly. Sometimes, it walks away and never comes back. And sometimes, it stays, on your terms. That's the most satisfying part. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped needing them. And in doing so, I finally became everything they tried to find in someone else.